Hey TPT sellers, only 14.3% of all of TPT SEO comes from things like your sales or reviews, clicks on your resources, your click-through rate when your resource shows up on TPT search, or that TPT snowball effect from working on your store. Which means 85.7% of your TPT SEO comes from the stuff I'm going to talk about in this video. My name is Mike Fuchigami. I'm the host of the SEO Tpreneur YouTube community. This is my Sunday TPT SEO Secret series where we look at the developer manual that Team TPT uses for their search engine. They use a program called Algolia Search, and if we understand how Algolia Search works, then we can understand how the TPT SEO algorithm works. Algolia has 8 rules for their search engine. I believe TPT only uses 7 of those rules. And of those 7 rules, only one of them uses the sales data, the click-through data, the review data that TPT has to impact search results. So that means only 1 out of 7, or 14.3% of TPT SEO is impacted by TPT business data and popularity data. And the other 6 out of 7 rules determine how relevant your product is compared with the search term that the teacher is searching for. So 85.7% of all of TPT SEO is due to keyword relevance. Over the past few weeks, we've been looking at these rules one by one. Today's episode is looking at rule number 7, exact match. We'll look at what that term means. It doesn't mean what you think it means. It doesn't mean what I thought it meant. We're going to look at how exact match compares with ratings and reviews with the impact on TPT SEO. And then we'll end with some TPT SEO takeaways. This video is for TPT tadpoles, TPT hamsters, and TPT hawks. If you're not sure what I mean by those terms, go check out masterclass number 2, which is up there at the top. Let's look at what exact match means to the TPT search engine. The Algolia developer manual tells us that records with words that exactly match the query terms will rank higher. The query term is what the teacher is searching in the search bar. Basically, if your product title has words that exactly match what the teacher is searching for on TPT, your product will rank higher. The exact criterion is a counter. If an exact match occurs in an attribute, and attributes are things like the title, your product description, your product snippet, it could include things like reviews, custom categories. Any of these things could be looked at by the TPT search algorithm. So if an exact match occurs in an attribute, the count is incremented by 1. If there are 2 exact matches, then the count is 2. If there are 3 exact matches for the words, then the count is 3. The higher the count, the higher the record is ranked. Or in other words, the more exact matches that you have in your title or your product description, then the higher your product will show up in TPT search. But it's important to realize that these exact match words can be in different spots. You could have one of the exact matches in the title and another exact match word in the description. If the query, so the search term that the teacher is looking up on TPT, if the query contains 2 words that match exactly in the same attribute, that's 2 points. So if you have the 2 words in your title, then you get 2 points, 1 for each match. On the other hand, if the first word matches in one attribute and the second word matches in another attribute, then that's also 2 points. So according to rule number 7, one word can be in the product title and the second word can be in the product description, and that would be considered an exact match. It looks like at this rule, keyword density does not matter. Keyword density is the number of times your keyword appears in your product description. So if your keyword is 1 word long and you have that word 10 times in your product description and your product description is 100, then that's 10%. You would have a keyword density of 10%. And what the Algolia manual tells us is that keyword density doesn't matter. Exact words are only counted once per resource. If the same word has 10 exact matches in a record, whether in the same attribute or not, that query word still gets only 1 point. So if the search term shows up 1 time or the search term shows up 10 times, it doesn't matter. For the exact counter, it only counts once. This means the exact counter is always a number between 0 and the number of words in the search query. So that means whatever the search phrase is that the teacher puts in, back to school classroom decor. So that search phrase has 5 words, then the maximum score for exact is 5. Even if you have back to school classroom decor 20 times in your product description, the maximum score for the exact counter is 5 because there are 5 words in the search term. Let's look at an example. When users search for something, the search engine will rank records with the exact query words higher than those with similar inexact words. What does exact mean exactly? It's not what I thought it meant. You know, when you search and you put quotation marks around the search term to get an exact result, that's not what we're talking about. Algolia gives us an example in their manual about dog food. They give an example with 3 records. One record has dog food, the other one has dog treats, and the third one has food for dogs. The way the exact counter works is it looks for the word dog in these 3 records. So dog food gets +1 and dog treats gets +1, but food for dogs does not. And then it looks at the second word in the search term, food. In this case, dog food gets +1 and food for dogs gets +1. The best score you can get is 2, and the search record that has dog food in the attribute will get 2 points. And then dog treats and food for dogs are tied at 1 point. And you'll know from previous episodes that Algolia uses a tie-breaking search algorithm. So it basically groups things, and if there's more than one result in the group, it goes on to the next rule to break the tie. Let's look at a TPT example. Suppose a teacher is searching up science activity, and as a couple of resources, we have scientific method activity in the title, scientific process activity, 3rd grade science activity, science experiment, and science of reading activity. Well, here's how I think the TPT SEO algorithm would calculate the exact score. It looks first at the word science, and it tries to find the word science in the titles of the records in the database. So in this case, 3rd grade science activity gets 1 point, science experiment gets a point, and science of reading activity gets a point. The scientific method activity and scientific process activity, they don't get any points because it's not an exact match for science. Then the TPT search algorithm looks at the word activity, and any resources that have activity in the title will get a point. So in this case, scientific method activity, scientific process activity, 3rd grade science activity, and science of reading activity, they all get 1 point. We add up the scores, and then we group them based on who has the highest exact score. So in this case, there are 2 resources tied with 2 points. 3rd grade science activity and science of reading activity. These would both show up before resources that only have 1 point for the exact score. In this case, scientific method activity, scientific process activity, and science experiment. You and I know that a teacher looking up for science activities probably isn't looking for science of reading activities, but that's not what happens right now. So here's a search for science activity. Today is July 21st, 2024. I can see here that this activity about science of reading shows up in the first place, even though I'm searching for science activity. If I scroll down, the second resource is about science of reading, and finally, the third one is actually a science activity. Now, TPT could implement a rule that basically says if you're looking for science activity, take out the results that have of reading. But we don't see that hard-coded rule right now, and they probably won't go in that direction. My guess is they'll simply hope that people will say, I'm not looking for science of reading, I'm looking for science activities, and then hope that teachers click on science as a category. The moment we filter by science, then all of a sudden this all about me science flask result comes up at the beginning. What does exact mean if we're talking about single words and plural versions of the same word? The Algolia search manual goes on to say that synonym matching and plural singular matching are considered exact. Thus, a word is considered an exact match to the algorithm if its synonym exactly matches a query. What does this mean if we're looking up science activities? Are activities plural and activity singular considered the same word by the algorithm? The only way you can find out is if you test it yourself. You can't just assume that they are, and you can't just assume that they're not synonyms. You have to search both terms on TPT to see if they are both highlighted. And just because the plural term has both terms highlighted, it doesn't automatically mean that the singular term will highlight both versions as well. If I search up science activities, I can see activities is highlighted in purple, but I'm looking to see if activity singular is highlighted, and here I can see activity singular is highlighted. So that tells me if I look for the plural version of the word activities, I get the singular. Well, let's say I search up the singular version, activity. In this first result, I can see activities plural is highlighted here. So that tells me that the TPT search algorithm automatically considers activities plural and activities singular to be the same word. And it's also important to note that I looked up the single version, activity, but the first result is activities, plural. So there's no benefit to having the exact match as opposed to the synonym or the plural version of the word, they're considered equal by the search algorithm. Here's an example. Let's say I search on TPT for science activities, plural, and I have a couple of records. I have science activity, singular. I have science activities, plural. I have science experiment, and I have science experiments. Pause the video and guess what the exact scores would be. By the way, if you've learned something new here that you haven't seen in another place before, can you please like the video? It lets me know that this is content that resonates with you and I should keep on making more stuff like this. If you've heard of this stuff before, can you leave a comment? I'd love to hear where you saw this information about exact match. Okay, so my guess would be science activities. Well, it's looking for the word science, and all of these resources have science in them, so they would all get a point. And then when the TPT search engine looks for activities, it's going to say activity and activities plural. They're really the same word, so I'm going to give both of those records 1 point. But experiment and experiments, those are not the same words. Therefore, I'm not going to give them any points for that. How do I know that activity and experiment aren't synonyms? If I search up science activity on TPT, I'm looking to see if I can find the word experiment. If I find the word experiment, I'm looking to see if it's highlighted. Here's the word experiments, and because experiments isn't highlighted in purple, I know that the search algorithm hasn't considered it. So if we calculate the exact score, science activity and science activities will have an exact score of 2, and science experiments and science experiments plural will have an exact score of 1. The higher your exact score is, the earlier you show up in the search rankings. Okay, so what does the TPT search algorithm do when it has resources that are tied? They both have the same exact score of 2. In this case, the next rule will break the tie. That's why we call Algolia and TPT search a tie-breaking search algorithm. Let's look at where things like reviews, earnings, sales plays into the TPT search algorithm. Here's the big picture. TPT SEO is based on Algolia's 8 rules. Let's look a little closer at how the tie-breaking SEO formula probably works. Algolia has a YouTube video where it explains that you have a bunch of different records, and these are the things on the left-hand side. And it goes through the first rule. In this case, it's sorting it by color. If you watched episode 1 in this TPT SEO secret series, I gave the hypothetical example of sorting resources that have color spelt the American way versus color spelt the British way. So those would be resources sorted into 2 different groups. And then there's a lot of resources that spell it COLOR, and those would be tied together and they would go on to geography. Back when personalized search was a thing, they probably used geography and location as an SEO signal. So resources that were near to the teacher buyer searching would show up before resources from TPT sellers farther away. At least that's my theory. So then those resources that are close together would go on to the next tiebreaker. In that case, we would be looking at the number of words in the search term compared with the number of words you have in your title, and so on and so forth. That's what we looked at in episode 1. Well, now we're at rule number 7, which is the last rule for this keyword relevance section. Here's how I think it works. Remember, just because we have the manual doesn't mean we know exactly what TPT search is doing. We have a pretty good idea, but it's like a recipe. You and I can take the same recipe for chocolate chip cookies, and we might bake our cookies slightly differently. Just because we have the recipe doesn't mean we know exactly how TPT search, but we have a pretty good idea. Here's a hypothetical example of a keyword that has lots of competition, 30,000 competitors. I'll walk you through the theory, and then you tell me what matches your lived experience creating products on TPT, or tell me what I'm missing. Here are the 8 rules for the TPT search algorithm. The first rule looks at typos or word variations. In this example, I'm just arbitrarily coming up with numbers, and I'm saying there are 15,000 results that have 0 typos, 5,000 results in yellow which have 1 typo, and then 10,000 results that have 2 typos, and these show up in the red group at the end. I'm just making these numbers up. This is just to get the point across. So what's a typo? It's not always a typing mistake, although it could be. It also looks to see how close a word is with another word based on how many letters it needs to add or delete or change. Let's pretend I'm searching for grade 3 in TPT search. I have a bunch of results like grade 3, 3D math, like 3 dimensions, 3rd grade spelled out. According to Typos, the resource that has grade 3, if we just look at the number 3, that has 0 typos because 3 exactly matches 3. There are no variations. Nothing needs to be changed. So grade 3, that resource would show up in that first green group with 15,000 results. 3D math, that 3D has one typo because you have to add the letter D to go from the search term 3 to the search term 3D. So that's one typo. 3D math as a resource, that would be in the yellow block of 5,000 resources in the middle. Third grade, third 3RD has 2 character typos. You have to add the letter R, you have to add the letter D. That's how you turn the search word 3 into third. So in this case, a resource with third grade would show up at the end here in that red group with 2 typos that has 10,000 other resources. And finally, third grade spelled out, THIRD doesn't have the number 3 in it at all. So then in this case, it just wouldn't show up at all. It's not relevant. So now it has 15,000 results in that first group of green, and it's going to the second rule, geolocation, to see if it can break some ties and to sort the resources in that green group. Right now, geolocation is not being used. It's like when you're opening up your app for directions to the nearest gas station and you see the closest gas station show up first. That's what geolocation is. It's not used in TPT search anymore. If it was, you would get different results if you were logged in as opposed to if you were logged out. Watch episode number 2 to get more information about geolocation. In this case, because geolocation is not being used, those 15,000 results in the green group move on to the next rule for a tiebreaker. We're going to look at rule number 3, which is the number of words in the search term compared with the number of words in your product title. So just arbitrarily, I'm saying the person is searching for 3 words. If you're in the purple group, you have all 3 of those words in your title. If you're in the cyan blue group, you have 2 of the words being searched for in your title. And if you're in the orange group, you have only 1 of the words being searched for in your product title. And you can see that all 3 groups, the 0 typos, the 1 typo, the 2 typos, they all need to have tiebreakers. They all get grouped again with the next tie-breaking rule. An example might be a teacher looking up science experiment worksheet. We might have a couple of resources. One is called scientific method worksheet. Another one is science lesson worksheet. Then you have science of reading. And then we have a 4th resource, science lesson experiment worksheet. Well, let's look at how many words in the product titles match the words being searched. Science of reading only has 1 word matching. So it would be in the orange group. Scientific method worksheet and science lesson worksheet, both of those resources have 2 words matching. And at this rule, rule number 3, you don't need an exact match. So scientific matches science. By the way, the first person who tells me how many typos scientific has compared with science, I've got something special for you. Leave a comment. Let me know what the typo score would be. Finally, that resource with science lesson experiment worksheet, that would have a score of 3 words, which is the maximum you can get because there are only 3 words in the search term. It doesn't matter at this stage if you have extra words in your title or words between the search words. It's just looking for the number of words. And at this rule number 3, it doesn't matter the order of the words. We'll talk about that more in a later rule. So far in this scenario, we've got 11,000 results that are tied for 3 words. We need a tiebreaker rule because we have an 11,000 way tie. The TPT SEO algorithm needs to be able to find the most relevant results to show to the teacher searching. Otherwise, they're going to bounce away and go to Google. The next tiebreaker, rule number 4, is filters or categories. This is when we search by grade levels or subjects. These are categories. For the rest of this thought experiment, we're going to ignore everything but the first group. Because if you're not in that first group, it doesn't matter. You just won't show up. You've got to show up in the first group for each of these rules. So of these 11,000 results that are tied, some of them will match the category that's being searched for, and some of them won't. If you watch episode number 4, you know that if you have a filter turned on, it only returns results from that yes. So this technically isn't a tiebreaker. The way I've drawn it here is a little bit inaccurate. If it's not in the yes group, then it just won't show up at all. But I've put the red no group in here to demonstrate the tie-breaking philosophy. So these 9,000 results that match the category being filtered, they go on into the next rule for the next tiebreaker. Rule number 5 is proximity, which looks at where your words are in your title compared to what the teacher is searching for. Are the words close together in your title, or are the words far apart? You might have words that match the teacher's search query, But if they're in the opposite order, then your score is worse. In this game, a lower proximity score is better. Watch video number 5 for more information. If we had an example of someone looking up for science reading, and one resource has a big list of things like reading, writing, math, science lessons. Another resource says science of reading in the product title, and a third resource says science reading. The proximity score counts how many words apart are the search words in your title. In this case, science reading is only one word apart. Science of reading, well, science and reading in that case are 2 words apart. They would be in the yellow group. And finally, reading, writing, math, science lessons. So in this case, reading and science are 1, 2, 3 words apart. But because reading and science are in the opposite order, there's a +1 penalty. So the proximity score would actually be 4. And so that would be in the next group. Oh, I have it as 3, but I should make that 4. You get the idea. So now we only have 4,000 results that all have the keywords 1 word apart. We need a tiebreaker. And the next tiebreaker looks at attributes. Searchable attributes are different parts of our product page that the TPT search algorithm looks at. The TPT search algorithm has a priority of attributes. So I think that the title is the most important attribute that gets looked at by TPT search. And then after that, it's speculation, but it's probably the product description, especially the introduction snippets at the beginning of your product description. And then in third place, it could be reviews or maybe custom categories. I'm not really sure, so let me know what you think in the comments. Either way, if you have the search terms that a teacher is using in your product title, then you'll show up in that purple group up at the front. So now we have about 2,000 resources and we need a tiebreaker, and that gets to rule number 7, which is today's episode looking at exact matches. Up until now, if you had typos or spelling variants, you could get this far. Once you hit rule number 7, if you have the exact search term spelled the exact way, or you have a synonym of the exact search term spelled this exact way, then you'll be in the green group. You'll be slightly ahead of resources that have a typo or a variation. So in this thought experiment, I'm saying there's 1,000 words in that group. We just went from 30,000 results down to the top 1,000 results based on just keyword relevance. There are 24 pages per search result on TPT. So that means just based on keyword choice alone, we can get somewhere between page 1 to page 42. We still need to have a tiebreaker because we have a 1,000-way tie. We need to break that tie. And so the next rule looks at custom variables. These are popularity numbers or business metrics. The Algolia Developer Manual says rule number 8 are things like an SEO score, or the number of likes a resource has. So for us, it's rating, or the number of page views it has, or the number of sales it has, or maybe the price. So all of those things that we worry about, that only comes into effect in rule number 8. Only one rule in TPT search uses their sales data. Only 14.3% of TPT SEO, so search engine optimization, is based on sales. Everything else we've been talking about in this episode, so typos, words, filters, proximity, attribute, exact, these 6 out of 7 rules account for 85.7% for search engine optimization on TPT. Or another way to say it is 85.7% of TPT SEO is from keyword relevance. That means choosing the right keywords to get your product seen by people in TPT search. That was a hypothetical example for 30,000 competitors. Let's look at a keyword that has less competition. Let's say 3,000 competitors. And in this model, if there were only 3,000 results, well, based on rules number 1 to 7, we could get into the top 100 results just based on keyword selection. This means that a keyword on TPT that only has 3,000 competitors, well, we can get onto page 1 to page 4. What about a more niche keyword that only has 300 competitors? Well, if you can find that niche keyword, then just based on keyword selection, you can get into the top 10 results, which means you're definitely on page 1. All of this is from keyword relevance, which basically means you can optimize 85.7% of your TPT product just from keyword research. If you don't know how to do keyword research, in episode 38, I explain how to do competition research. And then later on in episode 43, I explain how to find those mythical keyword unicorns those higher volume, lower competition keywords, watch that episode number 43 to find out an unfair keyword strategy. All right, let's sum it up with some TPT SEO takeaways. The first takeaway for new TPT products or for new TPT sellers is that showing up for the right keywords is 85.7% of the game. 6 out of 7 rules for TPT SEO focus only on the keyword. For veteran TPT products, search relevance might explain how a resource with fewer reviews can beat you in TPT search. It might not. I mean, you might have optimized your resource and they might have optimized your resource, and maybe there are some business metrics that aren't obvious. My current theory is that if you're active on your store and if other resources are selling well, then all of your products get this TPT store halo boost. And that wouldn't be obvious just by looking at the results. If you're behind another resource, maybe the order of the keywords that they're using is different from the way that you're using those keywords, especially in the title. And that would be something to think about. The third takeaway is that exact match is important. Yes, it's rule number 7, but it's not as important as typos, so character variations in rule 1, or the number of words in your product title that match the number of words being searched. That's rule 3. Or the proximity of the keywords in your product title. That's rule number 6. So if we want to win at this search engine optimization game, then we have to understand how these rules work. It's not just because they started selling 10 years before I did. It's also because they've optimized where they put the keywords. And maybe if you optimize for high traffic, low competition keywords, maybe you can start to carve out a little bit of the pie. If exact match is not as important as some other factors, it also means that your TPT SEO score or the units sold or your earnings or your reviews or your click-through rates or your overall clicks, they're important because they're in rule number 8, but they're not as important as relevance, which is rules number 1 to 7. And this is important for any search engine because if it was based purely on sales, then it means anytime you typed in a search phrase into TPT, the best-selling resource would show up. And that's not useful for teachers. It's not relevant to what they're looking for. The bottom line is if we can figure out keywords that teachers are looking up, and if we can show up on page 1 for those resources, we can increase our TPT earnings. If you learned something new in this video, please hit the subscribe button. It sends a signal to other TPT sellers who haven't found our community yet, and it lets them know that this is content worth watching. If you've already subscribed and you thought this video was useful, can you please share it? There are lots of SEO ideas out there on TPT land, but not all of them are current and up to date or based on research. If you've heard of a popular idea out there with TPT SEO that disagrees with anything that I've said in this video, I'd love to hear about it in the comments. Check out episode number 43 to find out how to get those higher traffic, lower competition keywords. Next week, we're going to look at rule number 8, which is to see how all those popularity metrics and the business data metrics impacts TPT SEO. All right, bye-bye now.